understanding the Shekhinah was in the temple.
Yes.
And you could get prophecy. You didn't have to be in the temple to get the prophecy, but people all around the world just got it from that Or Mitzion.
That's right. Somehow that connection seems not to be one that is so localized, right? And that it spreads forth somehow, although think about it, that the act of sucking is a profoundly tactile and olfactory experience of incredible directness, right? It's not like eating where you chew and you have to metabolize it in a much more complex way. That's why babies,
Primitive.
It's primitive. It's primal. It's primal. You don't have to, you can interject it, so to speak, right? You don't have to work it through and chew it in that sort of way. Okay, excellent. And I think Elisa was
Maybe
next.
I can take on that because I'm puzzled with the paradox.
Yes.
Sucking and milk. Well, maybe
Milk and vision.
The image,
We're synesthetic
like
here.
it so much.
Yeah.
Is something passive or sounds passive? The milk is there already, and
Right.
maybe it has to suck. Whereas the vision is something active.
Right.
So we just have the word eating.
Yeah. I said eating. Yeah.
Making
Different.
something out of it, flavors or the way you eat. So maybe
Well,
vision
here it's all drinking it in, though. Yeah.
drinking, but maybe there's an element of transformance, passive drinking, sucking,
Right.
to a vision,
Right.
making something out
Right.
of it.
Okay.
Turn it
Beautiful.
into a vision.
Beautiful. And I know that there's like a million hands up here, and I may not be able to call on anyone. Dennis, I'll jump in and we'll see whether I'll try to.
The
bring
first
you in.
paragraph is almost word for word what you find
In
in
the-
the 6th, 7th, and 8th century Midrashim like Sefer
Absolutely.
Kahana.
Right.
Where for them, the
Right.
images of the temple is on fire. It's like Elijah. It goes up and rejoins the heavenly temple, which
That's
is its
right.
upper access.
That's right.
But then he jumps in the next part.
Beautiful.
Moves completely differently to
Right.
this image of the suckling God in the visions.
Right, yeah, that's absolutely right. And notice here, and the notion here that the synesthesia that you would see like at Sinai, V'kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. We're going to see that later. All the people saw the voices, right? And Pate Ibn Ezra, who said it really just means perceived, right? Rabbi Akiva famously said that the wires got crossed at Sinai, so that we were our consciousness was so expanded that we were able to see the audible and hear the visible, right? And of course, probably the developmental psychologists in the room here are going to immediately say, well, little children are experience synesthesia too, in particular. Visionaries do, and people in hallucinations do. There's a whole array of times. Sometimes artists do, right? Famously, Hélène Grimaud or something like that. Whenever she plays a note on the piano, it's a particular color, and so on and so forth. There are many people like this in small and large ways. Close your eyes, and when you hear music, and you probably see colors. And but there is something, it's certainly in that what Dan called primitive, that sense of going back to something that is not so mediated here. But there's a multiplicity of colors here that is something that I find really, really interesting. Now I'll take your comment.
So I'm sure that this is not necessarily something that they knew at the time, but now we know that a baby and a mother actually are communicating with each other exactly what that baby needs in that moment. So what minerals or vitamins the baby receives that day is based upon some kind of communication that happens hormonally. And so I think in terms of prophecy here, if we looked at it through that lens, then we'd see the Shekhinah is also changing based upon what we're able to what we're able to understand and incorporate into our lives in that moment.
That's right. It's a dynamic here of that the stimulation is going two ways. Here.
Exactly.
Right, and this is also seen as a stimulating of the divine as well, and an interplay, profound interchange. This is talking about a mystical moment zoharically. Okay, so Louis, I just want to go on for a little bit, but I've got you here, and so I just want to show you some things that I think lie behind this text right here, because the image here of going to Gei Chizayon and coming up with the breast milk here There's obvious word plays here, okay? And so some of you immediately will notice the word chazeh, right? Chazeh, which refers to the chest, right? And so that's clearly coming in. And then gay as well, the valley. And so just a couple of texts here that you can see. The text from Shabbat 88b. I'll just do it in English here, right? Tzor amor dodi li ben Shaddai yalin. That's English. My beloved to me is this clump of myrrh that lies between my breasts. And this is amazing because אמרה כנסת ישראל לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא, ריבונו של עולם, אף על פי שמייצר ומאמר לי דודי ben Shaddai yalin. Even though my beloved distressed and embittered me at the golden calf, still my love lies between my breasts. So you can read this probably in both ways, but the most simple way of reading this is that divinity is lying between the breasts of the people Israel here. In other words, the punishment is the embitterment, okay? The punishment and the separation here. And still, so there is this notion of intimacy here. But of course, when you start reading this notion of divinity lying, the people of Israel, the community of Israel lying between the breasts, read that Kabbalistically, Knesset Yisrael, and of course it's the Shekhinah. So the notion of the Shekhinah being in that place between the breasts, now think of that topographically, okay? So it's like between two mountains. So here, I'll just show you this image here. Let's see if this works. Oh, it doesn't. Every time you do this at a different screen, it doesn't play out beautifully here. So it's drinking in the Shekhinah as milk. Let me see what it said. This is all confused now. But, okay, that's just as well. Gazing through the prism of vision, Shekhinah letting the milk down. It's what Zalman would always talk about. What's chesed? It's God letting down the milk when the children call out, right? And so you can see here, this is Geh Chizayon here. And in the Zohar. So you can see that in a way, oh boy, okay, it's doing this right here. Did it a little too soon. Okay, but I want to, the other thing that occurred to me, I want to show you one text before I wipe that out. You didn't see that? Okay. Well, thank you. What just happened on the screen there. From Rashi saying here, Ben Shaddai Yalin, immediately following this incident, God instructed them to build him a Mishkan so that the Shekhinah might be concentrated there between the staves of the ark. And then it says, so that the ark, the Ben Shnei Habadim, right? Liot Mitzum Tzamim, Shechinato Ben Shnei Habadim, that the divinity concentrated the divine presence, meaning something a little different there, the Shekhinah, than it came to mean later, between the two staves of the ark, right? Because in the first Beit HaMikdash, Shenirim BeMikdash Rishon Kishnei Shadayim, that kind of the presence of the Shekhinah here was like breasts protruding or pressing up against the curtain. Dochakinu voltin beparochet. Okay, keneged apetach, right? And so, whatever you might think about this, which is kind of interesting here, but we can do lots of things with this, which we won't right now. But the Zohar is clearly drawing on some of this language here of understanding the Shekhinah here in terms of kind of maternal nurture, right? Coming from the place of the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so the last thing I want to say is I think what they're doing here is Geh Chizayon, there's the valley, so to speak, and you see like the topographical form, which might bring to mind breasts, and in Chazeh, and then with Yud Vav Nun, it is a lengthening of that dot to the Vav and then to the Nun Sofit. So that's what I had coming down as an animation. But you understand, you see the way it lengthens it. So I'm not 100% sure the Zohar meant that, though the Zohar elsewhere talks about like the Yud becoming a Vav, for example. So there's a sense of flow from that little seed through the vav of connection, through the nun of nourishment here. Okay? And it's really this notion of the I want to take seriously this notion of the multiplicity of colors that are there in the Shekhinah. It's all there, so to speak. And what that might mean. Okay? How we might understand that rainbow of color. Okay? So one comment, and then I want to go on to another text. Yes?
The way I think about that is like it's the possibility of possibility.
Nice.
Everything is available.
Everything is available. And that, so beautiful. And of course, one of the names of the Shekhinah in David ben Yehuda HaChassid, in his book of mirrors, is the Ha'efshar, or in one commentary, Ha'efshar shebe'efshar, possibility within possibility, right? So that's like a very beautiful comment. Thank you so much. And you know, I didn't put this in here because I always do this thing. I put in things I don't use, and then something that I want to use doesn't make it. But there's a very famous passage in the Zohar in Sava de Mishpatim, in the Zayda, the grandfather of Parshat Mishpatim. Let me see, I have it here somewhere. And yeah, so and I'll just it's the Zayda, the Saba, right? I should make it Yiddish, okay? But this is what we do. We make the text present in some ways. That's part of the domestication of any tradition. Butte, right? It was a butte. Yeah, right. It was made domestic from Bait, right? From Bait, right? And it says so. The Sava the Mishpatim here. It's from volume 2 of the Zohar, 99a. Okay, and it goes Patach hahu Sava ve'amar, the old man, the trickster, right? The wise trickster opens and says, "Vayavo Moshe betoch ha'anan vayal el har," and Moses entered the cloud, right, and went up, ascended the mountain. And anan da maihi, what is this cloud? Ella dahi dichtiv, but rather this can be explained through the verse. Et kashti natati be'anan, from the Noah story, I placed my rainbow in the cloud. Taninan dehahu keshet ishlachat levushoy. Okay, that rainbow took off her clothes. Vayahavlon leMoshe, and gave them to Moses. Uvahahu levusha salek umine chama, and from within that garment, and through it, he was able to see what he saw, chama madechama ve'itnahe mikola, and he derived enjoyment from everything, from the totality, right? He saw what he saw, delighting in the all, going up to that place, right? Adhacha. Okay. So what's really interesting here, and you see why I brought this text in here, because this is another example here of prophecy, or of intimacy with the divine. And what is it? Moses is going into the cloud, and the cloud is another name here for the Shekhinah. There are alternate interpretations. Some will read it as Yisod. And the Keshet there is, I'm going to read it as Shekhinah, it's the most common way, is that rainbow, right, which is the Shekhinah. The alternate way is to read it Yisod within Shekhinah, but okay, right, within the cloud. And this beautiful moment where the cloud says, "Here, take my garment. I'm going to enfold you in this garment, which is the rainbow," right? "And you will see what you will see," and he saw the totality. So you see how that interfaces with the previous text that we saw here, the notion of being enfolded in the cloud, which is the garment of vision. Right? Here this is really, it's more of a tactile thing than it is the notion of drinking in, right? Because drinking in normally, and not normally, but often, in Kabbalah is seen as a very, very high rung. It's like when you go beyond Bina conscious to Chokhmah, it's Yidiyad Derech Yanikato. It's knowledge through sucking, not through discursive knowing, right? But here it seems to be either an unfolding, right? So like the notion of what is opened up when we are clad in a rainbow tallis, right? I mean, I often think, but I never asked Reb Zalman, did he get the idea of Pnei Or tallis from this a little bit? Maybe. You understand? Because and again, I'm using rainbow both in the sense of covenant with the earth, you understand it? And I'm using it in the sense of that what happens when traditionally when you Kabbalistically when you put on a talit, that you feel the radical presence of the Shekhinah in you that both shelters you and opens you up, right? And what does it mean that there's an awareness of many, many ways and many colors in this rainbow? So this is an example of a profoundly Jewish text because it's talking about a talit, right? And it's talking about the Shekhinah. But maybe it can open out in different ways because I also believe that one of the things that we need to do is to learn each other's language. Survival, the anthropologist Barbara Meyerhoff once said, comes in cultural inflections. We speak specific languages. We don't speak language in general, right? And we want to know in the deepest kinds of ways, right? What are some of the ways that that our text might open us out? I mean, Cynthia Ozick, who has a lot of merit, I don't always agree with her, but she's quite brilliant. She says, you know, if I want the sound to travel wide, I make sure to blow at the narrow end of the shofar, not at the wide end. You get it? So how do we do this? This is not simple. But what does it mean to put on a garment that might have for us as Jews to put on metaphorically a garment that may have within it multiple streams and multiple colors, you know? Yudis.
I just want to make a connection with everything you said.
Oh, good. Someone should.
About today, specifically, I was just showing some people before. So Rosh Chodesh Shvat, today's Rosh Chodesh Shvat, the first day of Shvat.
Right.
So it's the only day it says explicitly, Parshat Dvarim begins with Holil Moshe Be'er et HaTorah. Moshe began to explain the Torah.
Right.
And Rashi says Be'er b'shivim lashon, in 70
Right.
languages.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
Chassidus considers
Right.
Sefer Dvarim this bridge between
Right.
the
Right.
first part of the Torah and the oral Torah.
That's right.
So it's opening up
That-
that oneness into
Shkoyach.
multiple.
Shkoyach. And let's just even say too that that if we want to say that something of all 10 sefirot that have gone through, especially the lower 7 sefirot, it's very easy to get to 70 as well. So 70 flavors here, and that's metaphor, of course, because there are thousands and millions. Yes.
And I was thinking of Psalm 104.
Nice.
So it's opening, and this garment, but then it goes on to describe everything, the
Right.
diversity of things.
Right. So what would that garment look like, right? And who would you co-create it with? You know, would you and maybe we would have to study the texts on sacred garments and other traditions with people from other traditions, right? So that's part of the Harchavat Gvul HaKodesh, or HaKdusha that we've been talking about. Dan, you've been waiting patiently.
There's also about, is an intimation of that this can happen only in intimacy.
Oh,
I
nice.
mean, that the Shekhinah takes off, undresses.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Yes,
It's-
she takes off her garment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What
Yes.
does she look like without a garment?
Well, there might be garments among the garments, but no, but there's this sense that, you know, the Torah can only be known by a lover for that very reason.
But also, that
Oh, it's
to
beautiful.
appreciate the multiplicity, it only comes through intimacy.
Yes.
You're willing to know and be known.
To know and to be known, and to make yourself vulnerable
Naked.
and naked in that way. And so the nakedness and the adornment,
Yes.
you know, and when we gift someone else with a garment of ours or something like that, you know, I have to say, some of you probably, Zalman once gave me a jalabia of his, and you know, I'm not such a fetishist about these things, but I have to say, you know, there's something very powerful, or sometimes from a loved one, if a loved one gives you something that has been infused with, or we wear rings from our grandmothers, and you know, and all sorts of ways. We put on different kinds of garments, sometimes even gender bending it, right? I mean, so it's really interesting. Avram, you were going to say something, or the moment passed?
What I was wondering
Yes.
is that if the Shekhinah, right, which is the gay chizayon,
Right.
that, you know, that was in the temple and it
Right.
was not completely localized,
Right.
how does this, or are there texts that speak about the fact that, that then the Shekhinah became non-local,
Right.
right? And, you know, has wheels.
Right.
And the
Right, right,
Merkabah,
Merkabah.
and does this, is there any intimations that prophecy becomes actually more widely available
Well-
once the temple is not there?
You know, they go back and forth on this, because clearly there's a notion that prophecy absolutely continues, and it gets reread in many sorts of ways, and you know, obviously in Chassidus,
Right.
it's spread out throughout the you know, everywhere there's nitzotzot, and that's in later Kabbalah too, that you can the possibility of prophecy is there. I think in this text, it's not saying that, but you could, you know, this is what it means to make, we both align ourselves with the text and maybe try to read it, you know, not with a certain sense of humility and openness, but also with our own filters, and you know, that's a very beautiful move that you make. So Louis, I'm going to call on you, and then I want to go to something of our greens that just struck me.
Two things. One, the original statement about the priest that it seems to resonate with Kol Machtakot B'Yad Shemayim,
Right.
B'Yad Shemayim.
Right.
And then that the whole transition from this intensely masculine kind of a thing to this really intensely feminine kind
Right.
of thing is interesting about what you're doing.
Right.
But the other thing that about what Avram was just talking about, the word here is that in the temple, it was, the Shekhinah was more concentrated, the Tumesah.
Yes.
And now, so the price we pay is we lose the concentration, but we get the spread.
Yeah, and the thing that's so funny is that when the Chavraya in the Zohar are talking about all this, they're experiencing this though. You understand?
Yes.
That's the thing that's so funny about all of this. So it becomes radically present, even the act of studying
As they
this.
wander around the Zohar, they
Yeah.
encounter
And
the shreds, so to speak.
so-
The Vadim also resonates to Adam Rishon, and how in the second story, Eve comes from, not the Vadim, but from the ribs.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to move to page 16 here, just to show you something. I have a few texts on page 16 that are, you know, where I talk about, specifically about reading text that simultaneously delight and might stick in the throat that can't be integrated. And on your own, you can read what Wendy Doniger says, and Arthur Wasco has some great things to say. I want to look at something that Art Green says, and on 16 here, where he talks about the commitment to kind of bind oneself to the sacred language of tradition, its myths, metaphors, symbols. But the second paragraph, cautiously, hesitantly, I begin to make the words of tradition once again my own. I will do so not as a literal believer, but rather as one who recognizes that all of these events are themselves metaphors for a truth whose depth reaches far beyond them. I would put it differently, but it's okay. I know that religious language is an attempt to put into narrative form a truth so profound it can't be told except when dressed in the garb of narration, maybe the garb here of the Keshet, right? And here it goes. This particular narration, that of my people, I make my own. This is now the real key. I surrender to its power and allow myself to become another link in the chain of generations. What I ask in return is only that the ongoing process of tradition not be seen as closed. I plead, a plea addressed to God, to history, or perhaps to myself, that my generation too might add its hand to the shaping of that which will be seen as tradition by those who come after us. And to me, that's like, because he talked about the struggle to surrender, and that it didn't happen too soon, right? And that it took time, but at a certain point, he was able to do that and to understand that sometimes, what is it that stimulates our own creativity? Martin Buber makes the claim that he says, why is it that he's talking to youth in Prague, the Bar Kokhba Circle and beyond, and he says, why is it that it might be useful to align oneself with a particular tradition when there's so many windows to look out and so many tastes to be had? And he says, that's good to do that, but he also says that there's some kind of depth that can happen when one binds oneself to a tradition, to the travail of people, the ups, their sufferings, their joys, learns that very, very well. And it's not that necessarily one will then speak exactly the same language, but that in the process of that binding, a kind of deeply creative process will be generated. Right? And, again, I'll quote like Art Green today, that's not the Torah for everyone here. I understand for some people, a syncretistic path might be the way. But there is something, I think, profound about the notion of the combination of acceptance, surrender, but also saying that the truth that seems to be emerging in our generation, or that seems to be coming through, can also be made part of the tradition. That ultimately, whether it will or not, is not up to us anyhow. The later generations will make that determination, right? But it's a both and, it seems to me, and that's it's a very delicate dance, and you can't will it politically. You can't just say you want to get here politically without it coming from profound experience in wrestling. Yeah, Mark.
Just wondering, I never thought of this. Is this what Heschel means when he says all Torah is midrash?
Well, in a way, but Heschel, I think when Heschel is saying that, he's saying that revelation is always co-creation. It's co-revelation, that it's always an interaction between, for Heschel, the divine, and for us, mediated often through the lenses of Torah. But, sometimes he will, there's lots of Kabbalistic sources that will say that the Torah that we have is already a permutation from a Torah Kadmon and from a higher Torah. And some will say that it takes on different forms in different moments as different people read it, and so on. The Zohar, Chaim Vital said of the Zohar that it's like the letters are like of the Zohar are like the planets and the stars that are constantly whirring around, and the text is constantly changing in a dynamic. And then each person who reads it brings his her, here's, kind of lens to this. So it's a highly dynamic form. It might be going beyond what Heschel says, but there are, in other words, there are traditional sources that go far that are more radical than what Heschel's saying. Okay, so deep breath. So let's move to our second cluster of text. There were three. I might not get past two. That's okay. So this is on page 5, and again, so, those of you who've hung out know with me know this is one of my favorite texts, but I want to complicate it a little bit today. Okay, this is it's Zera Kodesh, Naftali Lopshitz, Polish Hasidism in the in the early decades of the 19th century here, and I'm not going to go through the entirety of this text here, okay, which is eminently worth it, and do a whole riff on what the face is and what panim is and the many faces and facets of panim. But I want to instead look at one core element of the teaching here, which is to give it away, here is the notion that at Sinai, when consciousness expanded of the people there, they were able to see the voice. They were able to see the deep teaching which was not the entirety of Torah, except mystically, which was not even the entirety of the Ten Commandments, or the 10 utterances, which was not the entirety of the first two utterances, which the people, according to one tradition, heard directly before they turned to Moses and said, "Daber ata imanu," lest we fry, lest God break out and we perish, or even the first word of I am. Right, but of course, all that was given at Sinai directly was the first letter of the first word, that Aleph, which of course is the sound of a breath. Right, and this teaching, even though many of us have heard it before, is still breath-giving and breathtaking. It's still astonishing. But one thing that's astonishing about this is that for the people who gave this Aleph is in a tradition where that Aleph is a pregnant Aleph, whereby all the letters of Torah and all deep teaching of Torah is there inside the Aleph. It's all there as the most concentrated zip file ever, right? And that all you have to do is keep on unpacking it and unfurling it and learning deeper and deeper teachings. But what's so amazing about this text here, to me, is not just that teaching, but rather the notion that at Sinai, not only was that silent Aleph kind of taken in and seen, but it transformed consciousness. So that everyone who downloaded that, so to speak, looked around and saw that the Aleph, which is the one, Hebrew numerically one, right? The aluf, the chief, right, is the divine, right? It is God, and it's written on everyone's face. And of course, he makes the move explaining that in a way that is profoundly embedded in Jewish cultural tradition. You try teaching this to people who've never experienced Torah, and even though the teaching is profoundly universal, you've got to do some hard wiring, okay? Because, you can just see, for example, I'm assuming people here know the letters, but yeah, on page 7, for example, in scribal tradition, when you learn how to read, how to write the Aleph, right? You can see the Aleph is always made by making 2 yuds and a vav, right? And so there's so many teachings on this. The yud is the seed of consciousness. Every letter starts out its life as a yud, according to the Zohar, right? It is kind of the bone marrow, what am I saying? The stem cell. The stem cell of all Torah. In a way, it's like the Aleph. Okay, that's what I want to say the Aleph is. in some ways. It is that stem cell of all the languaging within, okay, obviously we're talking Jewish language here, okay? And it can just ramify out in a million different directions. But the very notion that you make the Aleph with a Vav, right, and two Yuds, there's so many teachings that emerge from this. I actually have images for it, but I'm not going to look right now. And one of them is the notion that we are a Yud and God is a Yud, okay, and we come together to make a circle, okay. This is Natan ben Saadia Harar, one of the disciples of Abraham Abulafia, right? That God is a Yud and we're a Yud. The 10 Sfirot, we've got the 10 Sfirot. You come together, you make the circle of wholeness, right? In Chabad, for example, they'll talk about the higher worlds being a Yud, the lower worlds being a Yud, and the Vav is the Vav of connection, right? It's that Sinor, what connects us. And together it makes the Aleph, right? It makes the Aleph of consciousness, the Aleph of the world.